What's up everyone, I'm Dave Mech and welcome to a new video. And in this video I'm gonna show you the OTO Boum. The OTO Boum is a wonderful device that you can use in live situations to saturate, compress, glue your overall mix and make sure that your mix can be played a little bit louder by controlling the peak level. This is the third part of this series. The first part I went over the instant mastering chain by Doctron. The second part I went over the Electron analog heat. In this video I'm going to show you how I would do the same with the OTO Boum. Yeah, in this video I tend to call this the OTO Boum sometimes, but that's just because I'm Dutch and the OU is OW in our language, just so you know. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe, like and share, and yeah, let's just dive in. So let's first go over the signal chain structure. The OTO Boum does have the same kind of structure as the instant mastering chain when it comes to these building blocks. So as you can see from the diagram here, the compressor is a feed-forward compressor, which is preferable. I used it for the instant mastering chain. I used the feed-forward option as well, because I just prefer the sound and the result of it, as it's using the input signal as the sidechain input for the compressor to work on, instead of it using the compressed signal, which is what most compressors do in general, that don't have a option between feed forward and feedback. As you can see, the OTO Boum also has the preferable setup where compressor is before the drive. One thing I don't really like about the OTO Boum and the OTO Boum and the BIM as well, that's the reverb and the delay, is that the OTO Machines uses this LED screen. Let's say we want to change the attack. You see a dot, you don't know actually what that dot means. So I have the manual in front of me, so I can actually walk you through what the settings mean. But this is not the best interface for me. But after a while, you kind of know which dot is your favorite, so to speak. But it's still a bit, I wished it had a proper screen. So this is how the signal path is laid out. So I'll go over some of the functions. We have a compressor. So one compressor that combines the ratio and a threshold and a makeup gain. So you don't get a lot of control. You don't get a lot of indication of what you're compressing and how much you're compressing. And it's also very, very heavy compression quite quickly. So if we look at this little picture from the manual, you can see that at the low setting there's no compression, and at 9 o'clock it's already 5:1 ratio compression, which is quite insane. So you don't get that very subtle thing where you can dial it in a very meaningful way, like on the instant mastering chain or the analog heat. It's not that precise, and you just have to listen carefully. And also I can recommend to play with the in-gain. So the in-gain and how loud you push a signal through the OTO Boum is the thing that you can use to make the compression more heavy or less heavy, basically. So that's kind of good to know, and I'll of course show you that. Then we have the drive, which is basically a drive circuit before which pushes it through a distortion circuit that we can choose here with the distortion. So we got the 4 options here, which we can choose from here. But yeah, for this purpose, leave it at boost. And the drive as well is very sensitive. So at 9 o'clock it's already very noticeable. At 12 o'clock it's completely distorted. It also depends, of course, on how heavy you're compressing, because you get a volume boost because of the makeup gain, and how loud you're pushing the input into the OTO Boum as well, of course. But it's very heavy drive on an entire mix. If you push separate sounds through it, this drive becomes much more meaningful in the range it has. Then we have a mix, of course, so we can do some parallel processing, which is awesome. This is where the OTO Boum really shines, I think. And I use it for mastering quite a bit in that way. But for this video, we're going to focus on the fully wet thing. And then we have a high cut, which is a beautiful high cut. That way you can kind of distort something, and if you don't like the many high harmonics it adds, you can shave them off a little bit, which is ideal when you're using it as a parallel processor, basically. And then we have the level, which is the output level. And with this, we can kind of make sure that the dry signal and the wet signal are the same level, so we can A/B in a very meaningful way. So we have the in-gain, which is, you can push things quite loud. We have an attack, which ranges from yeah, this is kind of the downside of the OTO Boum and the Bim and the Bum, which are the reverb and the delay, is that you don't have a screen that actually shows you what the attack is. So you kind of have to remember. And for the OTO Boum, this is not a very big issue because you don't have that many options. But yeah, you have to grab the manual at the beginning to kind of know what the settings are. It goes from 50 microseconds to up to 33 milliseconds of attack. The release is from 50 milliseconds to up to 1 second. Now, I wish the attack would have had one higher option added. 33 seconds is it's enough, definitely for this purpose, but it would have been nice if it had a 50 milliseconds option as well. And for the release, it doesn't go low enough. I would have been cool if it had a 10 milliseconds and a 30 milliseconds release as well. It starts at 50 milliseconds, which in most cases is also sufficient. I either choose 50 or 100 depending on the situation. So we're gonna leave it at 100 milliseconds for now. Attack we're gonna set to 33 milliseconds, and we have a low cut, which is also nice for parallel processing, and then we have the distortion circuits and a noise gate. But yeah, we're gonna leave that for now for this video. You can also save presets if you want, but let's focus on using this as a mastering chain. We've gone through all the things that we need to kind of set up this this in the correct way. So this is the track that we're gonna work with. The reason that I chose this track is that it has a lot of pads and ambient vibe with a kick, a very sub-heavy kick. So it will be very obvious what the compression will be doing and the distortion as well. So when I played the track, you could see that the readout was around minus 19.4, which is the same as the previous two videos. So you can kind of A/B them on YouTube to see which one you like the most in terms of sound. So without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and dial in some initial settings. Remember, we have the attack on 33 milliseconds and the release on 100 milliseconds, which is most of the time a very nice setting, but I'm definitely gonna experiment with lower attacks and a lower release and different types of drive and compression. And each time you will see that I'll be changing the level to compensate and make sure that the wet level and the dry level are the same LUFS readout, so we can do some meaningful A/B testing. So without further ado, let's play this track. So let's have a look at, I've got the compressor at a 5:1 ratio, and the in gain is only hitting, you can see that the in is only hitting the third LED. I can push this by setting the in gain higher. Right, now we get some very heavy compression. But to keep the compression fairly subtle, even at higher ratio settings, I like to control kind of the in-gain this way. I can try to set the compressor to something in between 5:1 and no compression. Push the in-gain a little bit. You can still hear that there's a compression going on. Let's change the level until it reads out the same as the dry. There we go, so let's A/B. what you can really hear is that the kick is now very, there's a it's a very heavy compression already. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna dial back the in gain again and set it to first option. Push the levels a bit. Set the compressor to 5 to 1. And I'm gonna actually change the attack to 10 milliseconds. And let's compensate for the level. That's AB. Now what we can see already, if we look at the peak, is that with compression we get to -8, around -8 of peaks. And when I turn it off, you can see that it goes lower to -7.4. Right, so with the compressor on, -7.2 even, we get a little bit of control over the peaks already, which is quite nice. But this becomes way more obvious when we start using the drive. Let's first try the attack on one setting lower, which is 3.3 milliseconds. So ABing again. We can also try to push the compressor even further, so we can actually see at the bottom that it starts compressing. But I can tell you this, that even though there's no LED, it's still very obviously compressing. So there's another thing that the LEDs don't tell you the whole story. So it's a little bit useful, the VU meter, but it's not exact science in this case. Let's set the compressor quite a bit higher, so we get very obvious pumping. You could also see that the level was being boosted when I turned the compressor up. So you can hear that this is quite heavy compression. It has this nice breathing effect. I really like the sound of this compressor. So another thing that's very obvious to me is if you concentrate on the high end, when you turn the OTO Boum off, it enhances it in a very nice way without even using the drive. The mix becomes a little bit more open. It's also, of course, the compressor helps in that a lot. But you can really hear that the sound the OTO Boum provides is, to me, to my ears anyway, is very pleasing, very nice. So now attack at 3.3 milliseconds is actually the setting that I prefer in this case. Maybe even lower, but we'll experiment with that a little bit later on. And the release I'm going to leave at 100%, but we can switch between them so you get an idea of the difference in sound. And let's play the track again. This is 100 milliseconds and the first option is 50. Now, personally, I like the 100 milliseconds a little bit more for this use case. The 50 milliseconds, also, yeah, you can see that the LUFS meter went up a little bit as well. To me, this 100 millisecond thing, yeah, it provides more glue to the mix, I guess. When I play a lot faster, let's say 140, 144 BPM or something, I might switch to the 50 milliseconds. But in this case, this is 130 BPM. And I don't know. I just like the 100 millisecond setting here. So let's add some drive. Let's go there. And also I'll show you how insane this drive is. See, that's quite heavy. So we're not going to push that far, of course. Let's see how this sounds if we set it to about 9 o'clock. Now, I already kind of like this. When I push the drive harder, you can, if you listen to the kick specifically, it gets this bloop. And that's a bit, that tells me that I'm pushing it too far. So I want to listen again carefully. When I set the drive too hard, you will hear this pluk on the kick. When I turn it down until that pluk is gone. That's quite nice. Now I'm gonna set the level again. Let's A/B this. And also watch the peak meter. I'll reset it every time I go back into the wet. And you'll see that, well, it reads out minus 10.9, minus 10.4. That's kind of when the loop restarts, it kind of shoots up, but it's minus 10.4 is kind of the peak when all this is set up. Dry. So now with these settings, I'm gonna play with the attack. I'm gonna set it back to 10 and 30 milliseconds and to one setting earlier, which is 1 millisecond. So you get an idea of what it does. clearly hear, if you focus on the kick, that the pluck is back on these higher settings. So I could dial down the drive or the compression a little bit, but of course we lose in loudness a little bit. Now let's push this attack to 1 millisecond. You can really hear that the attack is now so fast that the kick loses a little bit, the punch a little bit. So that might be, a bit too much. We can compensate a little bit by setting the compressor a little bit less heavy. You can see also when we look at the peak again. It's closer to 10. And if I set the attack to 3.3 again and the compression a little bit higher. In this case we get to also, minus 10.4, minus 10.2, I can push the... You can see how much gain we're getting. Minus 10.4, and when it's off, it's hitting minus 7.4, minus 7.3. Right, so that's 3 dB of the peaks, which is quite nice. And it's kind of similar to the instant mastering chain and the heat. Those kind of the same results. But the sound is different, right? So if we listen to what it does to the wet sound. And we can really hear this well in the break of this track. You can really hear the breathing. So you can really get an idea of what the OTO Boum sounds now, I think. If I compare it to the instant mastering chain and the heat, it's interesting. I think the instant mastering chain, to get the 3 dB of peak reduction, I had to push the threshold quite low, and the compression you got was very heavy. But the cool thing, what I really liked about the instant mastering chain is that the transients of the kick were preserved in a very musical and nice way. And I think that has to do with the transistor drive rather than this boost overdrive kind of thing, where you could really hear if I push the drive too far, you kind of got this this pluk kick. And on the instrument mastering chain, this was not the case at all. Also on the instrument mastering chain, you could set the attack a little bit higher on 10 milliseconds or 30 milliseconds, and it would kind of work. And on the OTO Boum, if I do that, you get this pluk kick again, and then I have to turn down the compressor or the drive, and then it kind of you don't get that 3 dB of gain reduction. You mostly get around 2 dB at the very maximum. So these are kind of different approaches, different results, different sound. But what I do really like in the current settings that I have is that it's pretty transparent in that it's there's not that much pumping going on. It is there. There's definitely the breathing quality and obvious gluing in the low end. Let's listen again. Focus on the punch of the kick and the bass together. Without the OTO Boum, you can really hear that the kick is a bit separated in a way. When I turn on the boom, you can hear that the kick and the bass are really gluing together nicely. So let's play it again. This is off. So, yeah, you can hear that there's quite a big difference. And maybe the downside here is that the punch of the kick is kind of a little bit too compressed maybe. So let's try, and I'm going to do one more try to kind of dial in the boom in such a way that we get a little bit more of that punch of the kick back, while still aiming for that 3 dB reduction in peaks, and see how far we can get. So let's start playing again. And turn this on, set the attack. Of course, we need to set the attack higher. So we're going to set it to 10 milliseconds. I think that I used it on the instant mastering chain as well. Now we're on the brink of that pluk kick. Every now and then you can still hear it, but this is okay, I think. And now we're at, actually, I'll be damned, minus 11.5, and this is with less compression, attack on 10 milliseconds, and a bit more drive. And let's you can also definitely hear that there's more drive, right? We hear a little bit of distortion. So I'm going to stop talking and A-Bing again. So now we've got around -11 on the peak meter, which means that we got around 3.4, 3.5 peak reduction, which is quite amazing. You can definitely hear that there's some overdrive going on. Kick is a little bit plucky, a little bit more plucky than before, but this is still quite nice. Let's see how the brake sounds. This is kind of what I mean by the OTO Boum being quite transparent, is that because of this one-knob compressor, well, yeah, or because in spite of the one-knob compressor, so we got 5.1 ratio, but the threshold is not as low. So in the brake, it's not going, it's not really compressing all that much. You can still hear that it does something because there's still some breathing going on, but on the analog heat and the instant mastering chain, you could hear that it was working way harder, because we set the threshold way lower, so low that in the brake it still went quite far above the threshold. We're making sure that, making the compressor work a lot harder. And with the OTO Boum, this only happens when there's a kick. Then it starts really compressing more because it goes over the threshold. And then with a 5.1 ratio, it means basically that it's almost limiting, right? So it's going, everything that's going over the threshold is just reduced to 1 dB, because we're not pushing the in again too far. And you can see that the result is that it's quite transparent. We get 3.5, around 3.5 of peak reduction, dB of peak reduction, which is quite nice. And we get that nice gluing effect and the breathing and a nice attack as well. Compared to the heat, I must say that I prefer the Boum, and this has to do with the fact that the heat does the thing where it uses an envelope follower, and we can kind of choose which parameter to modulate, for instance, the drive or the volume, which is a very nice effect. But yeah, we don't get the same thing where we first compress and then go through a drive. That is impossible with the heat, and that's the one thing that I really like about the instant mastering chain and the OTO Boum. And the OTO Boum is also a little bit cheaper, which is also nice. Now, with the instant mastering chain, the difference is quite big in that in terms of sound. So with the instant mastering chain, you can compress very hard and still preserve the attack of the kick and stuff. It's quite interesting, and it still amazed me a little bit on how heavy the compression was and how well preserved all the transients were. And that is definitely the biggest difference between the OTO Boum, for instance, and the instant mastering chain. I'd say the instant mastering chain is kind of the specialist thing focused on a very specific type of thing, where the OTO Boum is more like the heat, in that you can do some very creative stuff with it. You can really process individual sounds very well with a lot of distortion circuits. You can really distort things into oblivion or add some subtle harmonics on top. It has a beautiful filter, that sort of thing. So it's more of a creative tool as well as being a mastering chain thing. In terms of sound, it's really, you could prefer one or the other. But yeah, like I said, the instant mastering chain does preserve the attacks of the transients a lot better. But I do really like the OTO Boum. It's quite an amazing tool. It sounds great. It's quite transparent. And you can also really push it quite hard. One last thing in comparison of the instant mastering chain and the analog heat is that the OTO Boum, of course, doesn't have an EQ. So we cannot boost the high frequencies or the low frequencies, or cut the low frequencies a little bit in a meaningful way, like on the heat and the instant mastering chain. So that is definitely a downside on the OTO Boum. But what it does to the signal and how it adds harmonics, I really kind of like it. It works well, but I do miss the high boosts sometimes. So I have to kind of, in a live situation, I might have to turn up the high frequencies a little bit or cut the lows a little bit, depending on the venue, on their mixer, for instance, which gives a little bit less control over your signal in a live situation. But you know, that's it. I hope you liked this video. I hope it gave you some insight in how you can use the OTO Boum as a mastering device for your live sets. Yeah, let's meet again in the next video. Until next time. Cheers.